Hello and welcome. In this lecture, we're going to be looking at how we can write things to the output log and specifically how we can write the values of our variables into it that can help us debug our games. Let's dive in and see how this works. So in Blueprint, we were able to write things to the screen when we wanted to quickly display some information or potentially to just debug something. In the past, we have in C++ used a U property to do that, but we can actually do this using a log statement. And it's a little bit complicated in Unreal, which is why I've shied away from doing it until this point, until we're a bit more familiar with the C++ syntax before introducing it to you. Now, the way it works is if you've got the extension here installed, the Unreal for Snippets by Captain Caps, this actually gets a little bit easier because you don't have to remember all of the complexity of the syntax. You just type ulog and it will pop up with an IntelliSense dialog like this saying ulog to help you write out the whole piece of code, and you can hit enter or select it with your mouse. And then what you're going to see is it's written out something that looks a bit like a function. It's not actually a function under the hood. It's got some little bit of Unreal magic going on here, but it's essentially a bit like a function. So what we're going to do here is we're passing in a couple of arguments to this function. The first one tells us what type of log category we are doing. The second one tells us the level of the log, so how urgent it is essentially. And then finally, we've got this thing here, which is basically a function within a function, which tells us the text that we need to print out. So how does this work? If we just leave this in our code, go over into Unreal, hit compile, we want to see where does it show up. Well, once the compilation has finished, we're going to go ahead and hit play. And what you're actually looking for is it's not going to be up on the screen here. It's going to be in the output log down here. And you can see it just about here. It's saying display your message. And we've got how many messages? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The reason for this is it's displaying the message for every single actor in our scene that is a moving platform CPP. So that is why we're getting so many messages. And you can see we can change out the message to be whatever we wanted it to be here. And we could also put some more information into this message, such as the start location or the name of the actor, things like that. So here we go. So we've got an output log, we've got our message, and you can start to see what the categories I was talking about are. You can see we've got log temp here, but up above we've got log audio mixer, log world. So they're different categories of logging that help us distinguish where is this message coming from, which part of Unreal is this coming from. But log temp is mostly what we're going to use because it's just a temporary place for logging out debug messages. And then there's display. This is the default level, log level, but we can have messages be a bunch of different things. It can be display or any value from this table down here. So you can see display here prints a message to the console and the log file. We've got the log down here, which prints a message only to the log file and doesn't display it in the console. So this is for things where you don't really want it to show up so much, but might want to use it for debugging. If you're debugging someone's game and it ran on their machine, they're sending you a log file. Then you've got warning. This is for when things seem to be going wrong, and it prints it to the log console, and it is also in yellow. Then we've got error, that prints it in red, and then fatal basically prints it to the console and crashes the engine. So you kind of want to use this one as a last resort, but it does allow you to have different levels in the log file, and I'll just show you what it looks like if we put in different messages here. So I'm going to copy our line for logging, and I'm going to make 3 of them. We're going to have a display, we're going to have a warning, and we're going to have an error. Now, these are typically the levels that we will use. So let's go ahead and have a look and see what they look like. Let's go into Unreal, hit the compile button, and let's stop and restart play. And by the way, you can bring up the output log by hitting the tilde key twice. It brings up There you go. We've got our output log, and you can see we've got 3 sets of message: the display, which is just in the plain white, warning, which is in yellow, so it stands out a little bit more, and error, obviously, which stands out a lot more. Now, we can add data to our log messages. I'm just going to delete the warning and error lines of the log, and we can add in some data into this string that's going to be printed out. The way we would do this is, for example, if I wanted to print out the move distance configured for a particular platform, that's fairly straightforward to do. We can say configured move distance, and that's the text that's going to show up. I'm going to put a colon in here, and remember, this is all within the double quotes to make sure that we're including it in the text. And then we can use a % followed by the F character. And you see that gets highlighted differently because this is what is known as a format specifier. It's something that comes from C all the way back in history. And essentially, usually you do a % and then some letter. You can see the different letters down here. The F corresponds to a decimal floating point, and you can see an example of what the output looks like over in the example column. And there's lots of other things down here. We can represent with D or I a decimal integer like so. So we're using F because we've got a floating point number. And then what we have to do is add in another argument to the UE log function. So make sure that you are doing this after you've closed the brackets for this text function, and instead we're putting a comma after here. So between these 2 brackets, it should be inside of the outer set, but outside of the inner set, if that makes sense. And then what we can do is we can pass in the value of our variable. So we can do the move distance variable like so. Let's go over into Unreal and see this in action. I hit the compile button, close down the compile window and hit play, and then hit tilde twice to bring up the log. And you can see our configured move distances showing up for the different platforms, 500 and 500 for the 2 moving platforms, and 1500 for the 3 pushers that we've got in the scene. So one piece of information that might be a little bit interesting or instructive is that we've previously talked about how we overshoot, or we did overshoot, the distance moved. And it'll be interesting to know by what kind of levels that is happening. So what we could do is we could create a float variable inside the if statement. So we know that we've currently overshot. We can say overshoot, a float variable called overshoot. We're going to set it equal to the distance moved minus the move distance. So that tells us how much the overshoot was. So I'd like you to have a go at logging the overshoot variable that we've just created here. So use the UE log function. Here it is for reference, at least the kind of structure that you will probably be using. You can also practice using that ulog autocomplete to put it in instead. And then compile and test your code and see if it works. Pause the video and have a go. Okay, welcome back. So we're going to use the autocomplete option here. I'm just going to close down my sidebar to have a little bit more space. And then inside this if, after we've created the variable, we're going to type ulog and hit enter. And then we're going to leave it at display. We're going to make the text platform overshot by, and then we're going to use %f, and then between these 2 brackets, we're going to add a new argument for the overshoot variable, like so. Now, let's head back into Unreal, hit the compile button, close down the live coding log, hit play, and double tap that tilde key. And you can see that every time the platform is turning around, it is printing out a log message and saying how many units it overshot by. You can actually see that in a lot of cases, it's overshooting by quite a noticeable amount of units, 3 units or 0.5 units. That's basically 0.5 of a centimeter, 3 centimeters. It's enough that over the course of your game, these platforms could have been drifting. And that's great that we've implemented a fix for that already. Great stuff. So hopefully now you've got another tool in your arsenal for trying to figure out what's going on inside your code, and later on when you are feeling more confident in making your own code, trying to figure out what's not working so well. Okay, I will see you in the next lecture.